Hi guys, so another day, another question from English Language Paper 1. We are today going to look at question 2. We are using the same source material that we used yesterday, and we are going to go on to the second question of the paper of section A reading. Now, question 2 is a language analysis question. So that should be the skill set required to do a language analysis answer is something that you are familiar with. It is the same technique that you will have used to do your literature essays and your literature questions. It is essentially using a PME paragraph. And I'm just going to show you how to craft them and how you can achieve the highest marks through almost linking ideas. And I'm just going to give you a couple of key phrases that I think you need to use to be really successful. So you are going to need to have your source material that you used in yesterday's lesson, and you are also going to need the answer sheet that looks like this. And why you need this is because it actually sections the part of the text that you're going to use. So if you haven't printed this off, then what I would suggest using on whatever electronic device you're using is just to have the answer sheet for this part of the question ready to go. You don't need anything else apart from that. So let's just give it a whirl. Okay, so as I briefly mentioned, one of the things I absolutely love about this paper is that for question 2, for the language analysis question, AQA actually just prints you the small extract that you need to do the question on the answer booklet itself, so you don't have to flick back and forth to actually find the extract that it wants you to use for question 2. So I'm just going to work directly with this here. So it says to you, the question reads, look in detail at this extract from lines 6 to 11, and AQA has printed lines 6 to 11 on the answer booklet for you. The question reads then, how does the writer use language here to describe the effects of the storm? Okay, so we're looking specifically for the effects of the storm. Helpfully, AQA gives you a couple of little nudges as to the types of things that you could look at. So it says you could look at words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. So whilst I usually try to stay away from sentence forms, so I'm not going to really touch on that, you might find something to say in that. But primarily we're looking for the language that the writer uses. So how does the writer allow us to understand what the storm was like through the language choices that they make, is essentially what they're asking us to do. Now, before we do anything, let's just look at the mark scheme really quickly. I'm just going to show you the top level of the mark scheme here, so that you're aware. You have to explain, comment and analyse how writers use language. I mean, it says structure there because it's the same assessment objective. The question assesses language, so words, phrases and language features, and to get 7 or 8 marks, which is where we should be aiming, we need to do the following things. So we have to show a detailed and perceptive understanding of language. So to be perceptive is to not look for the obvious things, to try to find something within the language where we can make a point that's interesting, that's potentially different to other students. We're going to analyse the effects of the writer's choices of language. So what effect does it have on a reader? What does it help a reader to understand or imagine? We're going to select a judicious range of textual detail. So this word here is quite important, a range. A range doesn't mean one word. Doesn't mean that we're commenting on one word. We're doing more than that. We're using a judicious range. So when we're going to look for these range, so these 2 or 3 things that we're going to talk about, these 2 or 3 pieces of language, they're going to be judicious. So that to me says that they need to be a little bit different, but we're going to try to find links between them, which is what I'm going to talk to you about doing today. And you're going to make sophisticated and accurate use of subject terminology. Terminology is on the second page. So you are going to have to know the different components of language. So if you want to say that the writer uses language that makes the storm sound like an animal, then you need to have the language available to you to do that, to show that you have got this assured understanding. Okay, so let's just have a little look at what it's asking us to do. Let's first read the extract together. I wouldn't necessarily be highlighting anything the first time I read through because it's just going to be a quick scan. The text itself isn't that difficult to understand. What had awakened him was the noise from the storm. Wind lashing the trees, rain on the rooftop, and thunder. He turned on the light with a sensation of being adrift in a boat and pushed closer to the bulk of the large dog sleeping beside him. He pictured the roaring Pacific Ocean a few blocks from his house, spilling in furious waves against the rocks. He lay listening to the storm and thinking about the black bird and about his mother, waiting for the pounding in his chest to die down. He was still tangled in the images of his bad dream. Okay, so we're thinking about the effects of the storm. How has the writer presented the storm to us as a reader? Now, the first thing I think is really worthwhile doing, especially for the language analysis questions in the language papers, is to think about almost like a big picture. What is the storm like? And to have one clear idea about how the writer presents this storm. So for this then, I'm going to suggest that the storm here is presented as being, I might say that the storm is presented as being quite brutal. I could suggest that it's quite violent. I suppose in a way it's quite aggressive. It could be seen to be almost like the enemy, or like a master of something. But I'm going to just jot these ideas on here. They're all just ideas. I'm just going to put question marks here. Master. I'm just going to put an arrow here because I think that the idea of being a master suggests that you have power and control. Okay, now the reason why I'm doing this, the reason why I'm thinking of these almost bigger pictures, is because whatever pieces of language that I draw upon to analyse, I want to link back to the main idea of how the writer presents the storm to us, the effects of the storm. So if I'm going to say that the writer uses powerful or violent or aggressive imagery to convey the brutal effects of the storm, or the violent effects of the storm, or the power that the storm has over the inhabitants of Earth, I need to link it back to that point altogether. So I'm just trying to think of an overall summary of how the effects of the storm are presented, because then I can pull my bits of language off there. I think really I'm going to try and go for this sort of the idea that the storm has control, and I think I'm going to try and go along something about here. Because I think that's easier than just saying it's violent and brutal. The idea of aggression, the idea of painful aggression and harm. So I'm just going to look in here. Now, I've only got 8 marks. I'm only going to gain 8 marks from this. Now, in the exam then, in order to get 8 marks, I'm going to spend approximately 10 to 12 minutes attempting this. Now, you might be thinking, oh my goodness, that's no time at all. How am I going to read it? How am I going to think about it? But essentially, you're just trying to produce a really well-developed idea. Okay, you can drop embed bits of language in to help support your point, so you don't have to analyse absolutely everything. Let's go through then, and I'm going to show you how I would do this if these are my overriding ideas for this. So, what had awakened him was the noise from the storm. I know it's noisy, but wind lashing the trees. I'm going to look there at lashing. I've got to be thinking to myself, what word class is it? So, what word class is it? It's a verb. The idea of lashing, and I need to think really about what to be lashed. What is that? Rain on the rooftop and thunder. He turned on the light with sensation. Right. I'm going to then go right, lashing. That's aggressive. That almost feels like something is being thrashed at or being beaten. But the idea of lashing is almost to cause pain or to cause harm or to teach someone a lesson or to punish somebody. I'm going to go here to the roaring Pacific Ocean as well. Roaring. It's a verb. But here it's describing the Pacific Ocean. So the Pacific Ocean is roaring. And there's obviously a linguistic technique at play here, which you should know. I hope you know what it is. A few blocks from his house, spilling in furious waves, so fury. So I've got this idea, this connected idea between lashing, fury, punishment, anger. He lay listening to the storm. The blackbird. We could talk, obviously, about the colour connotations here to do with black and white as well, if we wanted to, like the negative impacts because of the negative connotations associated with the idea of darkness within the text itself. Okay, so I've got my ideas there, and I now need to think about it. So to begin with, I need to be thinking that it's a straightforward PMU, but I'm also going to use a couple of indicator words when I'm going to introduce my analysis. So I'm going to get you to do this with me. So if you're doing it on the answer sheet, then do it exactly as me. If you're going to do it in your book, then just grab a book. If you just do it on paper, grab paper, and then you can transfer it into a book when we get back into school. So let's start very simply. I've not got long, so I've got to work fast. The writer uses language that suggests the inherent power of the storm and the devastating effects that it leaves behind. Okay, that's my point, isn't it? That the writer uses language that suggests inherent power, so that the storm has got this power within it, and therefore that it can lead to devastating effects. Remember that the question is the effects of the storm. So the writer uses language that suggests the inherent power of the storm and the devastating effects that it leaves behind. Okay, I want you to use this word as an indicator now. So specifically, and I'm going to use this when I'm going to zoom in. Okay, it's a word that I'm going to look for when you do these pieces of analysis. So specifically, the idea that the wind is lashing the trees shows potentially the violent power that this storm holds. And if you'd written that for me there and you'd left it there, I'd say why, how. So how does the fact that the wind is lashing the trees show the violent power that the storm holds? Because you've not explained to me, or I've not explained to the examiner, what lashing means and the ideas that are associated with the verb lashing. So that's what I need to do next. So I've made my point, but I now need to really expand it. So specifically, the idea that the wind is lashing the trees shows potentially the violent power the storm holds. And I'm going to add my terminology in there. So the verb lashing sounds as if the storm is cruelly punishing the trees and the landscape. Okay? If someone were to be lashed there would be a physical mark left where pain had been inflicted. Okay. What you'll see then is that we're trying to build the idea that the storm is violent, that the storm has power, that the storm leaves an impact on the landscape or on the nature. So the writer uses language that suggests the inherent power of the storm and the devastating effects that it leaves behind. Specifically, the idea that the wind is lashing the trees shows potentially the violent power that this storm holds. The verb lashing sounds as if the storm is cruelly punishing the trees and the landscape. If someone were to be lashed, there would be a physical mark left where pain had been inflicted. Now, what I need to do, in order to go up the mark scheme, up to the highest levels, I need to think about how I can link another piece of language to my original bit to do with the lashing. I need to find something else that shows that this storm is violent, has power, and will leave devastating effects on the landscape and on the people within it. So let's think about something. Let's think about the idea that the Pacific Ocean is said to be roaring. So I'm going to leave that there as a short bit, and I'm just going to add this on here. So I'm just going to indent my paragraph. This power that the storm holds can also be seen through the way in which the Pacific Ocean is said to be roaring. Now we need to say why the fact that the Pacific Ocean roaring shows the power that the storm holds. Now essentially the roaring comes probably from the noise that the ocean is making, essentially crashing against the rocks or as the waves swell and break. Now why do I mean a bit of geography, but why do waves break and why do waves become really violent? Well, it's usually as a result of tides, isn't it? It's because of I'm not a geographer, by the way, but it's because of the wind, and it's because of the conditions around the sea that make it turbulent. The sea responds to the effects of the environment around it, so the ocean is responding to the storm and its force. But roaring is a piece of zoomorphism, isn't it? We're said to be roaring. The use of zoomorphism here could, and I'd like you to be quite tentative with the language that you use. You're not going to say it definitely shows. You need to be quite suggested, so words like it could or it may. So the use of zoomorphism here could suggest that, like an animal, the sea responds to its environment and the storm. Warning and defending itself against a predator, where you're essentially trying to suggest that the storm is like a predator. Okay. So what I'd now like you to do, now that we've gone through a little bit of that analysis and we've started to have a little look at how you can begin to build it, I'd like you to go back to the original extract and I'd like you to pick out another idea from it. So pick out something else that shows the power of the storm or shows the the way that it impacts the environment in a devastating way. And I'd like you to add on another analysis paragraph to the ones that we've already started together, and that will conclude today's work on question 2.